Okay, well, if everybody's settled, we'll get started. First and foremost, a very warm welcome to everybody. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. It's a real pleasure to have you, and thank you to Bates Wells for hosting these fantastic facilities. Really appreciate it. We've had a number of people travel down from some distance, so I'm very grateful to our friends from Scotland coming down, from Tim all the way down from Newcastle, and other parts of the country. So thank you ever so much for taking the time and trouble to come and support this event, which is very much appreciated. You're probably all familiar with who I am and what we do, but very briefly, Mediator Locator is a free mediation referral service. We partner with 11 firms. The map throughout the UK shows our partnerships and where we have coverage, which is throughout the entire country, which is terrific. We're also potentially looking to recruit a few more firms. I'm in discussions with some more to fill a few gaps. So hopefully we'll grow a little bit. We've got coverage across all sectors. We've got particular strength in construction, in commercial, in probate, and there's a lot of depth and experience in the mediators we have on our panels. There's 27 of us at the moment, and we have two panels. We have a primary, sorry, do come sit down. We have a primary panel, which is for higher value, more complicated mediations, and that's priced on an ad hoc basis depending on the nature of the dispute and its complexity. And we have a set value panel, which is for lower value disputes, which is for up to £50,000, and those disputes are dealt with on fixed prices, so we can give you certainty and predictability on that. Currently, we have 19 mediators on the primary panel and 8 on the set value panel. I've met pretty much all of the mediators, and I have been very impressed with the quality and expertise that they have. So I firmly recommend them to you, and mediation as well. So that's the sales pitch, very quickly finished. We add both in-person and virtual mediations. So we don't have to necessarily be in person. You can go anywhere around the country for mediation done online. Today, we're going to be talking about various mediation topics, and I'm delighted to say we've got a number of speakers, and thank you to the speakers who are joining us today to speak, so you don't have to listen to me for the whole afternoon. They're all up there. There's one slight amendment. Our colleague from Sharp Pritchard, Rachel Mary Smith, unfortunately has phoned this morning to say she's unwell, so we have not got the pleasure of Rachel's company, but at last minute and a great personal sacrifice, Claire at the front here has decided to stand in, so a big thank you to Claire for doing that. So the agenda's there. On the chairs, I put an agenda for you. On the reverse of that is a little bit of information about Mediator Locator that you're welcome to take away with you. So hopefully we can run broadly to time, but it'll give you an indication of where we are and how much longer you have to put up with it. Okay, so without further ado, I'd like to start my presentation, which is promoting the value of mediation and changing mindset. Sorry, Claire. Absolutely, yeah, please do, please do. I'll hold my stomach in and smile. Lovely, thank you. Hello. I can do that, that's not a problem. Yeah, happy to do that for you. I'll do that. I've got everybody's email addresses, so I'll send that out separately. And if anybody has any questions as we're going along and they want to interrupt, please do feel free. We're not a huge group, so we can make this really interactive, and happy to answer questions and deal with the queries as and when they arise. So starting off mediation, I'm a massive fan of mediation. I've been a lawyer for over 30 years, and I spent a lot of my career dealing with commercial litigation. I worked for a large construction company called Bouygues, who got involved in a lot of disputes. I was head of legal for them for a number of years, and I didn't really use mediation as much as perhaps I should have done, and it's a bit of a regret of mine because I feel that it's a hugely valuable tool and should be used more often. So I want to talk today about why we litigate, why I think mediation works, and why I think it should be the first choice for dispute resolution if at all possible. I'm going to do a little bit of a comparative analysis between mediation and other forms of ADR. I'm going to talk about mediation in action. I've got a couple of slides and hopefully an amusing anecdote which will be valuable. And then I often hear the term mediation is about compromise, about giving in. And I would say that that's absolutely not the case. I think it's about strength. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that. And then what can we all do to promote mediation and its value? Because I do think it will help us There's an awful lot of conflict in the world, as we know, it's very current, but there's also a lot of conflict in business. And if we can find a better way to resolve our disputes more amicably, more maturely, perhaps with a little less ego at times, then why the hell not? And we can do it in a way that is quicker, cheaper, and faster. So let's try and resolve disputes more amicably and all be a little more harmonious as we go forward. So, question is, why litigate? Quite often people litigate because they don't necessarily understand that there are alternatives. It's a little bit of the default option on occasions. And I come at this from a position of personal experience. I've been involved in litigation both professionally and privately. And I've never met anybody that's walked out of litigation and said, do you know what, that was a terrific experience. I really enjoyed it. I wish I could do it again. Everybody comes away and they go, that was just miserable. It was hard, it was painful, it was stressful, and it just is. And it is a mechanism to resolve disputes, and sometimes it has to happen. Sometimes there's no option. You've got an intransigent party, you may be stuck with it and you have to deal with it, and it does resolve disputes, it's effective. But as I've listed there's a number of problems with it. It's very, very expensive. It's hugely time consuming. I was involved in a case when I was with Bouygues. This was some years ago now. We were an infrastructure provider and we won a contract to provide a heating solution up in the north of England. We were a subcontractor to a main contractor who was employed by a client. The client was a local authority. And what we were proposing to do was create a heating solution for, I think it was 3 schools, it was a leisure centre, and it was 2 tower blocks, and it was an integrated system. And for those lawyers amongst us, you may be familiar with an old form of contract called GC Works 10, which was a very old form contract, which was actually used by the government after the Second World War for military procurement. So it was hugely favourable to the person issuing the contract. And quite why we ended up with a GC Works 10 contract, I'll never know. But the contract didn't go particularly well. And I think our project delivery team did what is quite often the case in construction. They delivered what they thought the contract said rather than what the contract actually said. And because of the draconian nature of this GC Works 10 contract, because we didn't deliver strictly to scope, there was a termination right for the contractor, our prime contractor, and they terminated us. We were pretty shocked, but we got that horrendous notice on a Thursday afternoon saying, we're sick and tired of you guys, you can go, please collect your stuff and be gone by tomorrow. So we were thrown off the job. They then issued proceedings against us through the adjudication route, which a number of you are probably familiar with. It's a fairly quick route for resolution, usually takes, after the notice is issued, about 4 weeks to issue, sometimes a bit longer. And we lost that adjudication. It was a nightmare. We probably spent about £100,000 on legal fees just to lose an adjudication, and we had to pay damages of £1 million. So it was a disaster. I think the contract value was about £3 or £4 million. So it was just an unmitigated disaster. The powers that be in France, which was the holding company for Bouygues, they decided that the adjudicator had got it wrong, so they wanted to litigate to reverse the decision of the adjudicator. We then started a litigation, which, as it happened, was in Scotland because the contract was under Scottish law. It took 3 years for us to resolve. We spent £1 million in legal fees and we lost that as well. And we ultimately paid another 2 million on the top of the 1 million that we had to pay in the adjudication. So it was an absolute nightmare. But it was actually resolved in court on day 3 of a 2-week trial, where the barristers got together, said the evidence isn't coming out quite the way it wants, there's risk on both sides, let's try and resolve this through negotiation, which is effectively what mediation is. So 3 years, £1 million in legal fees and £3 million worth of damages, all resolved by the barristers in court. And I thought to myself there and then, and I still think today, surely there's a better way to do this. And I think there is. And I've listed there the reasons why. Pretty miserable experience, I have to say. But look, it is what it is. So when you're getting ready to go to court, you might be the person on the left the night before, anxious, stressed, wondering how it's going to go. But if you're going to a mediation rather than a court hearing, you'll probably be the person on the right. I'm not quite sure why he's wearing his suit to bed, but I think that's probably because he's much more content than his compatriot on the other side of the screen. So, as I say, I think mediation is definitely a way forward. It's a much more appropriate mechanism to try and resolve disputes if it's possible to use it. Appreciate not always is, but if you can, then you could be the person on the right. So with that understanding, it begs the question, why do we still litigate? And as I say, there is definitely a place for litigation. It's definitely a mechanism that can resolve it. There's a lot of processes, a lot of CPR rules, a lot of tactical elements that you can use in litigation. But I think there is perhaps a historical issue that it's maybe seen as the proper route, the way to do it. And I think there is also some ego in litigation sometimes, and I think that comes across. Maybe legal battles are normalized. Maybe it's the way people think that it should be done, and that mediation's a little bit light, a little bit fluffy, a little bit woolly, and that you don't really get a result because you just got to compromise. And I don't think that's the case. Is litigation really the best way? And I suppose if I've got one message that I would like everybody to go away with from what I say is, can you do this a better way? Can we look at the alternatives before we go to what I would suggest is the final option of litigating? So this is a little story that I wanted to tell you about, which just illustrates how mediation could be beneficial. This is a case based in Utah in the US, and it occurred back in 2005. And on the slide, you'll see there's a white picket fence, and then you'll see a building beyond it. So the person that owned the house with the white picket fence was a city councilman, and he had a lovely view over the mountains of Utah out of his back garden. The land in front of his house was sold to a builder. Now, it was actually lower down, so he didn't think it would be too much of an issue. But the builder built the property on the land. Prior to the build, there was a soil sample survey, which was done about a year before the builder bought the land. The city councillor, insisted on another survey, which immediately set the tone for the relationship between the two neighbours. Cost him another £3,000 to get a survey, which effectively said the same thing as the previous survey. So there was already animus between the two. The builder then went on to build, and the guy who was the councillor used his contacts with the council to get a huge amount of oversight on the building. It delayed it, it caused problems, and ultimately cost the builder additional funds through delay and disruption. Eventually, the premises was constructed, and the councilman was still rather unhappy about this, and he thought that it was taller than the city ordinances would have allowed. So he made another complaint to the council, and he also commenced litigation to try and get the matter looked into to have damages for the loss of view. It turned out that the building at its apex was 18 inches higher than the permitted city ordinances. So the builder was faced with the invidious outcome of having to reduce the pitch of the roof. You can imagine how expensive that was. I think back in 2005, it was around $25,000, probably $35,000 to $40,000 today. So that relationship was absolutely destroyed. However, there's a little postscript, and what the builder did was he decided to put a vent on the outside of his property, which he said was a piece of Art Nouveau in the shape of a cactus. Now, for the more observant amongst us, you'll probably not believe that, but I think it was a fairly warm remark back to his troublesome neighbour. And that then was the view that the councilman had. Councilman then complained to the council all over again, and the council said, this doesn't offend any city ordinances, this is perfectly permissible. So it stayed. So at that point, the councilman realised that it was best to try and engage with the neighbour and try and do a deal, effectively mediate. So he went to the neighbour and said, look, is there anything we can do? And the neighbour said, yes, I want a formal written apology and I'll take it down. A formal written apology was issued, and it was removed, and the problem was resolved. Again, it illustrates the point, why couldn't they just speak to each other at the outset and try and find an amicable solution? When you litigate in situations like that, the outcome of the court may have been that there's some loss because there's a breach of these ordinances. The remedy would be in damages. There's no power of the court to order an apology. Mediation has that power, it has that flexibility, it has that scope. So I think this case is a good example, and hopefully a humorous example, of why mediation works. just a little bit of history on mediation, and I'll run through this very quickly because I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this. But historically, mediation was a little bit of a sort of a poor relative in the ADR and litigation scene. And one of the reasons for that was the Court of Appeal has said historically that if you mandate mediation, it could potentially offend Article 6 of the European Convention of Human Rights, which is the right to a fair trial. In 2023, the case came back before the courts. It was known as the Churchill case, Churchill and Merthyr Tydfil, and the court said, no, the earlier ruling wasn't accurate. You can mandate mediation because there is still the right, if mediation doesn't succeed, to go to court and have your fair trial, so it doesn't offend Article 6. And that really helped to open the doors for more mediation. In October last year, there was a rule change in the CPR rules, the civil procedure rules, which addressed what's called the overriding objective, which is how you should approach dispute resolution. And it said you should really encourage mediation and use more of it. And then we're starting to see that flow through into actual case law now. And in November 2024, there was the Superdry Man City Football Club case. So for those of you who watch a bit of football, Manchester City, they had logos on the shirt, which was Superdry Zero, which is a zero alcohol brand. But the textiles clothing company, Superdry, felt that it infringed their trademark. So they issued proceedings against Man City Football Club saying you've got to stop this. But they also said, we're happy to mediate this solution and find a way forward. Man City Football Group said, no, we're not interested in that. We'll go to court. And the first time I believe it's happened, the judge said, no, even though you're reluctant to mediate, I'm going to make an order for mediation and mandated that the parties go to mediation. So it had to go to mediation because the judge stayed the matter. And 3 months later, they resolved it. I don't know the terms of that resolution because one of the other benefits of mediation is it is confidential. So that was resolved. And I've actually seen referrals come through to me through Mediator Locator now, where there's been a couple of cases in the High Court that have actually been stayed because the judge has ordered parties to go off to mediation. So I think this is the future. I've got a little bit of a freeze. Have I gone too far? Sorry. So I think I'm on the right slide. So just a couple of quick cases just to talk about. This is the first case is the subway footlong case. This is a case where a lad in Australia bought a subway and he measured it and it was 11 inches, not a foot. So that thereafter ensued a class action against Subway litigation. Ultimately, they resolved it, but wouldn't it have been better if they'd have sought to mediate this? Because I can envisage a situation where Subway might have issued the 1 inch free footlong to get a little bit of publicity to try and resolve the issue. So there's better ways to do it. And then you may be familiar with the Agatha Christie case and the Johnny Depp case, defamation cases. In fact, one of our mediators on our panel was the solicitor that represented was a representative in the Agatha Christie case, represented Colleen Rooney. Sadly, he's not here today because I would have asked him to give us a little bit of gossip, but that just gives you an indication of the caliber of people we have. But the defamation cases, you know, with mediation being confidential, wouldn't it have been better if the Agatha Christie case and the Johnny Depp case had been done through mediation? Because they wouldn't have washed their dirty linen in public. The indignity of going through what they went through, and ultimately Johnny Depp got a finding that was very unfavourable to him and damaged his reputation. If it had been through mediation, it wouldn't have happened. Very quickly on the comparative analysis, adjudication, arbitration, and expert determination, all perfectly good forms of dispute resolution. Adjudication, I've done quite a few adjudications. I'm an adjudicator myself. Again, it's still quite involved. It's still quite legalistic. If you've got an adjudication of a value probably in excess of £100,000, legal fees are anything from sort of £10,000 to £25,000, so maybe up to a quarter of the value. You do have costs risk, because whilst the adjudicator cannot award costs against parties unless they give the adjudicator that specific power, the adjudicator can determine who pays the adjudicator's costs. And they can be substantial. You know, if you've got a very large, nasty adjudication, it's not uncommon to see fees of £15,000 to £20,000 for the adjudicator. If you've got cost risk, construction, I know there's a few people involved in construction here. Have you ever been involved in a case which is clean on one side? It just doesn't exist. There's always dirt on both sides. There's always mistakes. There's always issues. So, you know, you can mediate these disputes where possible. And the beauty of mediation, which I think is underplayed, is you can retain and maintain relationships. Not always, but if you issue proceedings against somebody in litigation, that's it. The relationship's over. You're almost never going to speak to them for as long as you live. If you mediate, there is a chance you can get together, find solutions, creative solutions, and retain that relationship, particularly in the construction world, where you might want good subcontractor relations, other relations. It's really valuable. Arbitration is a little bit like private law. It's very much like the litigation process, but you have up to 3 arbitrators who are expensive, highly qualified individuals. Can take a long time. There's a lot of procedure involved. So again, you know, it comes at a cost. An expert determination, I don't have a lot of knowledge of this, but what I do understand is it's never easy to draw up the terms of reference. So you can spend a lot of time arguing about who you're going to appoint and how you're going to appoint them and what their remit is, whereas you could be mediating and resolving it. And with expert determination, one of the issues that does arise is you tend to get a very narrow focus for the expert to give a view on. You tend to get a narrow point and a discrete area, whereas in mediation, there's no boundaries. You can look at the holistic side of things. So again, I think it's a valuable tool. Yeah, please. Yeah.
Tim Council makes spells. And it was something raised earlier. If you are defending a claim and the claim is spurious, the claimants will do a trial on so let's have a mediation because you're going to get something. Another one is early mutual evaluation. It's part of the pre-action protocols, and so it ticks the box in terms of ADR, but it basically says we're going to go along to a judge or a senior lawyer to obtain a finding which is going to agree with us and not you. So that's actually quite a useful one if you're faced with what might be called a spurious mediation.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Thanks, Tim. Tim's one of our very experienced mediators. I think you've done, is it over 200 now, Tim, over the years?
Well,
Yeah. So yeah, early neutral evaluation is very, very valuable, especially if you've got situations where you know, you've got a spurious claim. So no, thank you for that. So I just very quickly bust a couple of myths. As I've said, mediation isn't about weakness. It's not about giving in. Yes, there is compromise, but it's compromise based on strength and compromise based on a reality. And it's really understanding the position you find yourself in and understanding where your strengths are and where your weaknesses are. Because as I say, it's very rare that you're strong on everything. And also there's an element of any claim where you have the time and effort and cost of just pursuing the claim. A lot of that can be neutralized through mediation. So you tend to find that if people mediate with strength, you get good solutions, and they're long-standing solutions. And there's a very current example of this going on at the moment. We see in the situation with Ukraine at the moment, you know, there's a lot of political shenanigans going on. But, you know, if people come to this from a position of strength and reality, and they understand where they are, I think the chance of a lasting peace is much higher. So what President Trump's trying to do is effectively mediate. Whether you have views on how he's doing it is a different question. I'm sure we all do. But it is a position, if you come at it from strength, then there's a good chance you're going to get a decent outcome. So a couple of very quick stats, and then I'll bring this to a conclusion. 2022, it was 17,000 cases, mediation cases. 64% commercial cases are now conducted online. Mediators are very open to working on fixed fees for the lower value mediations. For the higher value, it's a little bit more bespoke. The average day rate for a mediator is anything between £4,000 to £5,000, depending on the nature and complexity of the dispute. Compare and contrast that with how much it costs to litigate. Even doing a letter before action, if it's comprehensive, can cost £4,000 or £5,000, and you're not getting to resolution, you're just starting the process. So it's really, really valuable. And I would say cheap, but that's not cheap because it's not good. It's just really good value for money. The very high settlement rates, a huge statistic, 92% of cases settle. And it's declining slightly for the more complicated mediations because there's a lot of facets to it, but it's a really valuable mechanism, very high prospect of success. Mediation saved in the region of £6 billion in legal fees, lost productivity, and other costs. So it's hugely advantageous. And it's expected to grow in a number of sectors, in particular employment, professional negligence, PI, and that's due to economic factors as there's a financial squeeze, and also due to mandatory mediation policies. So it's here to stay and it's going to grow. So what can we all do? We can try and help change attitudes and mindsets, try and embrace mediation, see the value of it, tell people about it. We can promote it. And as I say, one of my primary messages, I'm very keen for people to think mediation first. Is this dispute something that can be mediated? And if it can, then try to mediate it. If it can't, and we accept that and we move on, and you may end up in other forms of more determinative forms of ADR and litigation. But can you mediate first? That's really, I want people to think that should be the first message. Educate people about the value of mediation and its benefits. And then, of course, use Mediator Locator for all of your mediations. It's mandatory. And then finally, I thank you to everybody for listening. I hope that was interesting. And if you have any questions, please fire away.